Hello, Lab Radio Hour listeners. My name is Armando Ariano. I am a youth leader with the Lab Learning Action Buffet and a member of the Radio Hour production team. We are now going to share with you our Life and Learning segment, which airs live on KTAL LP 101.5 FM every other week. And today's guest is State Representative Angelica Rubio. Hello, Representative Rubio. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk with us on the Lab Radio Hour.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the invitation.
You're welcome. And could you please tell us and our listeners a little bit about yourself, like where you were born, raised, and like what kind of things helped shape who you are today?
For sure. So again, my name is Angelica Rubio, and I serve in the New Mexico State Legislature. I just completed my 4th year in the legislature. I was born and raised in the southeastern part of the state. Born in Roswell, grew up in the small town of Lake Arthur, which I like to call Little LA, because I used to also live in Big LA. And about 10 years ago, returned to the state, came back because I'm a community organizer, wanted to really do some work in rural New Mexico, and having graduated here at New Mexico State University, decided that Las Cruces is really where I wanted to settle down and call home, and so I've been here ever since.
Nice. That's a nice little background. And just for our listeners, to provide them a little bit of background information, the lab is launching the Youth Voice Matters project in partnership with Generation Justice, which is centered in Albuquerque. And through the project, we are documenting New Mexico youth's thoughts on current topics, including educational equity in New Mexico. And as an example, I'm actually an alumni of the Enlace Southern New Mexico program, which is through NMSU and within all of the public schools. And being an Enlace student, it actually benefited me because I was exposed to like different styles of education or teaching that weren't really going to ever be shown to me otherwise if I hadn't have been in that program. And so it made it possible for me to like access a better or just like another level of education that I'm like, oh, that's cool. I would have liked to have learned this like without having to like, have be in the program. But do you have any like personal experiences like with lack of equity in education here in New Mexico?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the challenges that we have as a state right now is to address a lot of the systemic and institutional racism that exists here in the state because of our inability to really confront some of our past. And I think a lot of that impacts our educational system. I grew up in Lake Arthur, as I mentioned, went to public school my entire life, and I think one of the important things is really understanding some of the inequities that exist within our state. My first language was Spanish, and then to go into a school that didn't really provide English, Spanish learning, any ESL. I mean, I had to really adapt, and I think like a lot of kids in the state of New Mexico who are English is their second language, and that's a lot because of our indigenous roots, but also our Latino, Hispanic, Latinx roots. Inequities do exist, and my hope is that through some of the work that many folks in the legislature have been doing, we can begin to address a lot of those inequities within our educational system.
Yes, and since you're on the front lines of legislation here in New Mexico, we're actually really excited to interview, just like as a method of researching the current status of our educational equity in our New Mexico public schools. And one of the things we were wondering is if you could give us some highlights from the 2020 special session that just happened at the legislature.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who are listening and don't know, the New Mexico State Legislature only meets every other year for 60 days and every other year for 30 days. And this year it was our 30-day session from January to February, and it's only strictly related to budget. And for the budget, the governor decides exactly what we're going to focus on when it comes to issues. And then, of course, we have to balance the budget every year. And education, of course, was at the center of a lot of that because the last couple of years, the state had been doing very well in terms of our revenues. We're a state that's heavily reliant on oil and gas.
Yeah.
and has been for many, many decades. And so this year was one of those years. And so over the course of the last decade or so, we have really shortchanged education. And the last couple of years, the work had been to really stream up and lift up a lot of, amplify some of the importance of investing in our educational system, particularly after the Yazzie Martinez versus New Mexico case that was settled on that was ruled on last year, I believe.
Yeah.
And so we had as a legislature, it was necessary for us to live up to what the courts had said, and so we did that. But then, when oil and gas dropped significantly in early March because of the war, the situation with Russia and Saudi Arabia, the barrels of oil completely crashed.
Mm-hmm.
And then COVID started here in the state of New Mexico. And so those two things really led us to having to really figure out how we were going to further, to really work on our budget because we had a shortfall. Plus, we needed to also be thinking about how not to cut in really important programming, particularly around education. And so we had to go into a special session. That session started 2 weeks ago, and we were there for several days and voted on a budget that unfortunately did reduce the increases that we had given during this last budget year in January and February, but it didn't cut from the baseline. So the good news is that many of the programs that exist at the moment won't see significant reductions this year, and teachers, for example, will continue to receive an increase in their pay in comparison to the last few years. But we really have to figure out over the course of the next 6 months what we're going to be looking at when it comes to the budget, because we're going to have to go back in January and start figuring out what to do with the rest of 21 and then looking into 2022.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense, especially with everything that's been going on with COVID and things like that. And you're correct. Like, I don't know how many people really know that, but New Mexico we are heavily reliant on the price of gas. So we're like, hey, it's cool that it's cheap, but on a macro scale in the States, like, oh, that's not too good for us. But anyway, so moving forward, so under the following legislative acts, the New Mexico Bilingual Multicultural Education Act of 1973, the New Mexico Indian Education Act of 2003, and the New Mexico Hispanic Education Act of 2010, culture and language must be a foundation of all learning. And so, to our understanding, New Mexico has been in the violations of these acts since they were adopted. Was putting an end to this violation the main purpose of House Memorial 1?
Actually, not necessarily.
Okay.
So, those acts were really important in terms of the ruling that was made last year around Yazzie Martinez versus the state of New Mexico, because up until that point, the state of New Mexico had certainly underfunded education, particularly when it came to all of those different acts that you just described. But what happened is that during this year in March, at the height of, as COVID was starting to pick up here in New Mexico, the governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, appealed the decision to the courts, asking for it to be dismissed because they felt that that over the course of the last two sessions, we had already fulfilled our duties. However, House Memorial 1, sponsored by myself, Representative Cadena from Las Cruces, Representative Javier Martinez from Albuquerque, and Representative Derek Lente, who represents the Pueblos, we felt compelled to really speak out and say that actually we still have a long way to go to be able to fulfill the orders of the courts, because when we have had decades upon decades of children who've been impacted by institutional and systemic racism, especially when it comes to education and not addressing many of the things that, like I mentioned with myself, for example, who was an English as a second language learner, we've not done our due diligence to help kids like me and like others. And so, I mean, we've been working on it. We've been trying, and I give mad props to like teachers who do this work. But as a state and as a legislature, we haven't really created programs that have been able to support teachers and administrators at the educational level. And so House Memorial 1 basically said, no, the court order should not be dismissed. The court should continue to be overseeing and making sure that we follow what the court order asked for. And basically the memorial was asking to the legislature to say that while the governor was in support in dismissing, we were not.
Nice. And then we understand that HM1 wasn't heard during this special session. Do you think that was contributed to, like, since it was more focused on the budget and things like that?
No, I mean, honestly, House Memorial 1 did not get heard because we really didn't, I mean, to be completely honest, we didn't have the vote. We were afraid that we weren't going to get the kind of support that we needed. And the bottom line is that when it comes to issues around systemic and institutional racism, I think there's a lot of folks around the state who are still not sure how to navigate that conversation, and we're seeing it right now, right? Over the course of the last couple of months, when we're talking about racism and when we're talking about all these systemic issues, particularly with around law enforcement and police brutality, the same can be said around education. It's a very heated and hot topic, and so I think for myself and the three other colleagues who sponsored this legislation, we felt that it was a necessary step to at least begin to address systemic and institutional racism when it came to education. But unfortunately, many folks, both on the Republican and Democratic side, we didn't think it was actually really gonna go anywhere.
I hear what you mean by that. And for listeners who may have just tuned in, my name is Armando Ariano. I am a youth leader with the Lab Learning Action Buffet. And today I'm interviewing State Representative Angelica Rubio as part of our Youth Voice Matters project with Generation Justice. Once again, thank you, Representative Rubio, for sharing your thoughts with us.
For sure.
Representative Rubio, do you think a lot of people had heard about House Memorial 1 and were aware of like other related organizing efforts in support of transforming education here in New Mexico?
I mean, it's a yes and no. So House Memorial 1 was brought into the special session sort of at the last minute. And so in that case, no, there weren't a lot of opportunities to really organize people in support of it, although we were able to garner a lot of support from it from outside the legislature. But in terms of the spirit of House Memorial 1, I will say that there was a lot of support for the idea that the courts should continue to stay involved in making sure that the legislature does its due diligence in making sure that not only are we fully funding education, but that we're creating what some folks have called I'm sorry, I just lost the word, but there's a process where the courts
like a due diligence.
No, there's another word that they've been using that's more legal, but basically what happened is that on this past Monday,
yes,
the Supreme Court ruled on. So as I mentioned, Governor Lujan Grisham did an appeal. Well, that appeal was denied by the judge. The judge then on Monday ordered that no, actually the court still needs to be involved, and so that's one thing. So the appeal was denied. But then number two is that the court also ruled that that the state of New Mexico, the state legislature, that we are now responsible to implement a plan on how we're going to completely overhaul education so that it meets the requirements of what the court is asking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is where we're at right now. And so that's going to be the work of educators over the course of the next 6 months, to do that work as we move into a January session. And so, yeah, to answer your question, I think it's both a yes or no, and that House Memorial 1, I don't think was necessarily a surprise, but it wasn't because of the timing. There was very little time to really garner enough support for it.
I understand that. And Representative Rubio, how did you react whenever Judge Matthew Wilson made his decision on Monday?
I mean, I think for me, I was really happy because I felt like the things that I personally stand for, there was a lot of validation for that.
Yeah.
Because as somebody who was born and raised in the state, who attended public school, who attended undergraduate school here in New Mexico, there's a lot to be said about the challenges that I endured and the challenges that many students from across the state are enduring. And so while people will say that, yeah, I turned out okay, I was successful, I also like to think about the ideas of, well, what if things would have been better, you know?
Yeah.
Like, where could my life be a little bit different? And so the same can be said about, like, the children that are still attending school, the young people who are attending higher ed, that we have an opportunity and a responsibility to them. And so I think for me, the ruling on Monday was a good one. I felt happy about that, feeling validated for the fight that we were willing to take on. But more importantly, I think it was just, I feel like my colleagues do, that Yazzie Martinez versus the state of New Mexico is a case similar to, like, Brown versus Board of Education. Like, we are in a defining moment here in New Mexico, as the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
Where are we going to go from here? COVID has unveiled so many inequities that we already knew existed, but I think more and more people are realizing how much more inequitable the state is in comparison to others, and so much of it is based on our history of colonization and occupation and dependency and reliance on extractive industries, for example, or like the labs and things like that. And so I think the order on Monday just sort of solidified what many of us have been thinking about, not just around the issue of education, but from a more intersectional place, that there's just something like the issues of institutional and systemic racism have to be dismantled, and this is one way of getting to that.
Yes. Representative Rubio, do you think that publicity and activism about the lack of equity here in education here in New Mexico factored into Judge Wilson's decision?
I mean, honestly, I can't speculate, and it would be unfair to do. It would be unfair to do so.
No, I understand
that. I mean, I think that there's enough evidence that has been raised by the folks who represent Yazzie Martinez, that they were able to prove, just that they were able to show enough evidence to help get us to the decision that we got on Monday.
Of course. Representative Rubio, what are your suggestions for young adults and youth in southern New Mexico who want to learn more about these types of issues that are affecting our community?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that young people have seriously inspired me over the course of the month and two that we've just experienced over the course of these last 2 months. So much of the work that's happening around the country and around the state to address racism, and to be able to have those really important conversations, and having them being led by young people, I think is super inspiring. And what I challenge young people to do is to keep going, because I think that when older folks who have sort of been around, like myself, I mean, I'm in my 40s, that we might believe that we know everything, but younger people actually are in a position to really to inspire and influence so much change. And so I, one, suggest that you all keep going. But number two also is that um, that we need young people to be at the forefront of a lot of these conversations, particularly conversations around education, because uh, students, young people are the students. They're the ones that are sitting behind those desks. They're the ones that are um, dealing with the issues that come about with being a young person in these institutions. And so I think that if there's anyone that has the expertise, it's young people. And it's important to get involved with like your school board, to attend city council meetings, to attend or at least follow the interim committees that are happening with the state legislature, to get involved in programs related to like that your government classes in your school or your civics classes, that you understand how policy works in this state and in this community, because I think a lot of times, especially when it comes to just understanding how to navigate a system, I mean, in my opinion, it's designed to work this way so that it limits participation. And what I recommend is that young people should be challenging those systems and to try to make it as inclusive for everyone as possible.
I agree. Would you, and in your opinion, what is the best way to push for a positive change, along with the inclusion of the young people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of different ways. So, I as an elected official, before I'm an elected official, I am also a community organizer. And for me, my work comes from developing others to really step into their power and to elevate their voices and to amplify their voices. So for me, it's not really what I have to say that's important, but it's really to amplify those who are directly impacted by policies. And so for my recommendation, that of course you can get involved in elections and politics and things like that. That's one way, but really it's how do you build relationships with the people around you? And I think that's what's missing from so much of our society right now, is that we have become so politicized that we only talk to each other because of what we stand for, rather than really understanding who our neighbors are, who our friends are, who our people are. And so my challenge to young people is that if you do want to get involved, if you do want to make change in your community, like visit your neighbors, visit with your elders, visit with with community people, and learn about what keeps them up at night. What are the things that are the things that are keeping them from being able to pay their bills or put food on the table. Because when a young person has the ability to really understand and empathize with someone, that means that they will be challenged to do something about it, and there's a number of ways to doing so. And for me, I believe that the power is in community organizing.
Nice. That's very powerful. Representative Rubio, do you have any last words to inspire us to keep on working for social justice?
Yeah, I really like hope and pray that young people just continue to challenge the status quo, to learn and understand the world around us, and to be curious. I think a lot of times we're told that, especially in where I grew up, I was actually having this conversation with a friend earlier, is that we're sometimes, when growing up as a kid, my parents would always kind of scold me because I asked way too many questions. Que no sea tan chismosa. And like that was just the one thing that I would constantly hear. But I feel like we as young people have to challenge even our parents sometimes, to
Mm-hmm.
be able to. We should be asking questions. We should be curious. We should be wanting to reimagine something different. And so I really would just I ask people to just cherish not only the time that they have and not only using the time that they have, but also to really use their voice to learn more and to understand more and to really stay engaged and not lose faith in the fact that while the work is slow and it's hard, to also be thinking about the next generation, because that there will be a world beyond ours. There will be a world beyond ours, and I want to be sure that I do what I can while I'm on this while I'm on this earth.
I feel that. Yeah, it's very important to keep that generational movement going. Well, thank you for your time and your thoughts, Representative Rubio.
Thank you. I
We're
appreciate it.
Oh yeah, we're honored to have you here with us for this phone interview, and we appreciate everything you're doing to help make New Mexico a better place for everyone.
Thank you so much, Armando.
Thank you. We'll take care and be safe.
Thank you. You too. Wear your mask.
Yes, thank you.